I can't see anything because this purple light is blinding me. Okay, all right, very good. Well, welcome everybody to the Sci-Fi session, where we're going to talk about some of the latest and greatest tech. I'm Andy Cothrel. I'm president of Rushlight Ventures. Rushlight Ventures is a venture studio here in town that basically looks at defense and dual-use technology and how to turn them into something outside of the defense world. In terms of licensing or startups or asset sales or whatever else we might want to do with them. My background is 20 years of corporate stuff and about 13 years of startup stuff. And the panel, terrific panel here today, so thank you all again for making it. And if you would all just go down the row, we'll do the introductions, and then we'll dive into some of the discussion topics.
All right, thanks, Andy. My name is John Horack. In my current gig, I hold the Neil Armstrong Chair in Aerospace Policy over at Ohio State. That's in the College of Engineering, the John Glenn College of Public Affairs. I have 17 years at NASA and 35 years in the space industry across private sector, university, government, and startup. And I'm not from Ohio, but I got here as soon as I could in 2016.
I'm Beth Flippo. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm the CEO of Drone Express. We are a drone package delivery company. We are working with Kroger and Papa John's and a lot of other major retailers. I am very new to Dayton. I've only been here about a year and a half. I'm a New Yorker. I came here to work with Kroger, and I stayed because of Dayton. I like to say that because it's phenomenal here. I went to the State University of New York at Binghamton, the engineering school there. So my background, I'm an embedded software developer. I specifically work in wireless communications, which is what has drawn me to the drone space. And I'm really excited to be here and talk about science fiction coming to life.
Thanks. My name is Scott Galster. I'm the Vice President of Applied Science at Mile 2, which is local here on 3rd Street. Just since January, and before that I was the Executive Director of Applied Research at the Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute and professor in the medical school at WVU, and prior to that I worked at AFRL for 13 years. I've been working on AI/ML issues tangentially anyway for probably the last 15 years.
Nice, thanks panel. And by the way, we do have a nice chunk of time for the session. So if people have questions, I won't be able to see you raise your hand because all I can see is a purple light. But maybe somebody off to the side will see and interrupt me.
Yes, I'll handle it.
And then feel free. Now, we don't have to hold questions for the end. This can be a dialogue. So if people have something they want to toss into the mix, by all means, feel free. So I want to start with just thinking about when people think about sci-fi come to life, right? Everybody thinks tech, right? And tech is cool, right? And you see tech all around, and we can all, at cocktail chatter, we can all say AI and throw in blockchain and some other stuff. But what's really cool about tech, right, is what it enables, what it lets us do, right? So when you watch Star Trek, I know I'm dating myself. Some of you are like, what is Star Trek? But they never explained the technology. They just showed you the cool stuff and what it could do for people, right? So in your respective fields, which cover quite a nice breadth here, what are some of the things you see in the pipeline that are going to really kind of make their mark in terms of what they enable? What are some of the coolest things you're working on or seeing or talking about? Yeah.
Okay, you want me to go first?
The pattern's been established.
All right, that's cool. All right, that's okay. I just want to make sure I didn't jump out of sequence. One of the things I'm working on right now is the commercialization of low Earth orbit and the ability to use the low Earth orbit research environment not only to learn new things, but to grow new businesses and to solve challenges that bring social, economic, educational, and quality of life outcomes to people everywhere. As you know, the space station, International Space Station, great machine, weighs over 1 million pounds, $100 billion investment, multiple nations, the hardest thing humans have ever tried to put together. It's been occupied 24/7, 365 since November of 2000. So any of you that are younger than about 22 years old, you definitely live in the space age because somebody's been in space your whole life. But that's coming to an end. And so now we need to figure out how to extend our human presence and keep our human presence and extend our sort of fabric of life, which includes our economy, into low Earth orbit so that people can go further into space to cislunar space and into the moon. And you'll find out that Ohio has a huge role to play in that.
So, we don't have to go in any particular sequence, and I don't want to steal anybody's thunder, but what just off the top of your head, what are some of the implications for us that remain Earthbound, that there are going to be people not just in space, but actually conducting economic activity in space? How are we going to feel that?
In the same way that you feel the impact of GPS on your life, never having to get lost again if you don't want to, in the impact that the internet has, never having really to be alone again if you don't want to. Sometimes you do want to, and it's really hard, like your phone keeps ringing and those kinds of things. Space has become more like a utility. I know that doesn't sound sexy to say, where it's also got this sort of glitz and glamour and right stuff kind of history behind it. But it's super part of our everyday life. If you took space away, you can't buy gas at the gas pump. Drone that's delivering your groceries isn't going to know where to go. You're going to lose your ability to pay bills online because the internet's not going to work. I mean, it's a piece of our fabric. And so as we do materials research, bioag research in space, this is not all about, as I would say, ag for space. It's space for ag. It's using the tools and the environment of low Earth orbit and technology to figure out how to generate those positive outcomes here.
Great. Beth?
So what we're working on is trying to solve a problem that is just getting worse every day in this country, is that people want things and they want them fast and they're ordering online, and it's killing the environment trying to use the existing tools to meet that demand. There's not enough trucks to put on the road. It's just not just the gas, finding the people that want to even drive them. So we are using autonomous technology and electric technology, bringing them together in order to solve this problem and do it in a way that will save our environment. So this is one of the biggest things that drew me to drone technology, is that this is not just something you saw in the Jetsons years ago. There's a reason why people envisioned this, and that's really what we're working on.
And not to undersell the Jetsons, right? They were just as prescient as Star Trek in many ways. And if you don't know what the Jetsons are, check out like Cartoon Network or YouTube, catch some episodes. You're gonna love it. So, what is, as that starts to become ubiquitous, what does it really look like, do you think, to the average kind of person on the street? Are we going to be ducking drones? People have all these different crazy images of what life's going to be like when we start to really scale.
Well, our drones fly at 400 feet, so you don't see them unless they're coming near you. But I think it's going to become just as comfortable as 100 years ago when cars first started coming in. People were like, "Where are these? How are these going to work with the horses? How is this going to happen?" It just became a way of life. We're used to looking both ways before we cross a street, and I think drones are going to be that same way. So one of the biggest benefits is that things are going to be delivered to you. There's no more addresses anymore. It's ridiculous that we still even have to be tied to an address when we have a GPS locator on us all the time. So why should you order something at work and wait till you get home to get it? What you're going to see in the way we change is that you're going to be at the park, things are going to be coming to you, walking down the street, your Tesla is going to be driving and the trunk's going to open and the package is going to drop in while you're moving. I've even heard people talk about just umbrellas, that when it starts raining, an umbrella will fly in over you and cover you as you're walking. So you won't even need to have an umbrella anymore. And a lot of these things are really out there, but once these devices know you as an individual and not the address is only important for trucks, only important for routing. It should never have been that way. It should have always been you. That's where you're really going to see a difference in how people live.
That's really interesting. It's almost like better than having your own Harry Potter owl, right? So will people have their own drones that fetch things for them, do you think? Or will drones originate from wherever the thing is coming?
It'll probably be a service. that you'll sign up for, just like you sign up for parking or like the scooters outside, and it'll just know it started raining, this person's part of my network, send the drone up and the drone will fly right above you as you walk. Like, it's going to be something just you won't even think about. You'll just sign up for it. Maybe someday it'll be part of Amazon Prime, you know, that you get your own, that a drone will always be available wherever you go. So, yeah,
Nice.
we'll see. I'm sure they'll charge a lot more for it, but yeah.
You don't think that's included in my $130 Prime membership?
I do not think so. So,
Nice. So, Scott, what about from your end? You get to claim the famous AI initials. So, you know, what's really coming?
That's a loaded question because it's beyond sci-fi sometimes in my mind. I was just thinking as you were talking, I'm going to teach my granddaughter not just to look left and right, but up as well, just as a safety measure. So we're doing a lot of cool things, right? Business processing and automating them, and command control and communication, helping industry, commercial entities, the government, and so on. And so we're in that next step. But what I've kind of seen over the years is, you know, we build up computational power, and then we provide capability that meets up to the envelope of that computational power, and that provides us different capabilities. And so it's this kind of back and forth teeter-totter, if you will. And in the meantime, what we're seeing is the development of the capabilities, the foundational building blocks of, in my view anyway, the machine learning and AI capabilities. And we'll talk about AI and how it's thrown out just kind of like willy-nilly. But there's increased capability. There's a lot more elegant AI models that, you know, existed even 10 years ago. And they can do a lot more things. Now combine that with digital engineering and digital transformation and applying the right models to that kind of digitization, I think we're going to hit a precipice of new discovery, different things that we never thought that we could do, like, I don't know, writing a legal brief just because we can, because, you know, or architecting a building or engineering something from scratch just by laying out the requirements. Things that take a lot of work right now, a lot of brain power, a lot of labor, will happen when we want them to happen.
So, you know, the implications of that are so broad, right? But beyond the fact that the Dilbert mission statement generator is going to get a lot better, what are some early ways you think we're going to feel advances in AI? Are there particular like market verticals that are going to take the lead, do you think, or is it just kind of distributed throughout the economy or industry?
I think there are certain sectors of the economy that are going to advance more quickly than other ones, like in healthcare, and monitoring people for taking their medication, telehealth, and getting people the kind of recommendations to do the things that they probably already know that they should do, but kind of tracking it. New pharma, products that will come out of this. In transportation, we were talking about drones. What about, fast trains as well, and doing a spoke and hub kind of situation where a drone might be limited to, I'm just making this up, 300 miles. Well, what if you have to go 1,200 miles? Well, let's put it on a Hyperloop train first and get it to a hub and then bring it to wherever it needs to go. So by combining these different advances, right, it's not just a 1+1 kind of a thing. It's really an exponential growth.
Very cool. So one of the things I want, because one of our objectives here is not to just describe a fantastic future, but to give people an opportunity for where do I get a toehold. And one of the hazards when you talk about bringing sci-fi to life is hype, right? So, Rushlight Ventures, one of our first startups was Electrotech. Oh, flying car alert, right? It's kind of like, blockchain, AI, flying cars. Okay, what does that really mean? And when's it supposed to happen? And, I used to, as a kid, read old Popular Mechanics, right? And according to them, not only should I already have my flying car, it should be flying itself. My car should be driving itself if I'm on the ground. I should be eating from my rooftop algae tank, et cetera. Oh, and there, by the way, the synchronicity should have already occurred, and self-aware machines should already be dominating us. So I'm kind of glad that one hasn't happened. But what, if you think about the exciting stuff we just talked about, where do you see the risks in terms of we're overselling this? People are getting overly excited about this, and maybe if you want to play in one of these spaces, this might not be the best part of it to go to right now. Did you see any of that in the areas you're working in?
Well, I can jump in on that because I get that a lot from people is like, well, people have been talking about drone package delivery for 8 years. Like, where is it? Why are we not having drone delivery everywhere? And people just don't understand that these things take time to develop and be able to come out and be useful. So we try to explain we have a lot of customers, a lot of people always want drone delivery, and it's gotten to the point where we're saying, if you don't get in line now, we won't deliver for you. There aren't a lot of us. So if you didn't invest in the beginning, there's not going to be an opportunity for you to participate. But we hear that all the time, and it still doesn't mean that it's not going to be there. It's just that all technology, if you looked at the first car that was developed, it was nowhere near what cars are like now. These things take a while. But it's difficult to have people just look at it as like a buzzword and not understand that this is a necessary thing. This has to happen. There is no way that the way things are working right now can work in the future. And you just have to be patient and not expect every single thing that a car does today to have a drone do immediately day one. And that's where I feel like you have a lot of disconnect and people get really lazy about, wanting to stay with the technology. But it can't be expected to be 100% solution day one, and that's just what I tell people is if you don't get in now and you don't start developing these things now. So we have regulations. I'm sure you guys have all heard of the FAA. We work with the FAA really closely every single day, and people think that they're stopping us and that regulations are just there. They don't want drones in the air, and it's not true. It's that they want them to be done safely. Air travel is the safest form of travel in the United States. You can't throw a drone up that somebody made in their garage. So does it take time? Yeah, absolutely, but it's going to get there.
Right, and that's one of the reasons you're going to see a lot of drone aspects before you see flying cars, which implies there's a person in it, right? Mm-hmm. That's gonna be a second wave, right? There's going to be a whole wave of drones. There's going to be drones that crash. It's going to happen, right? Mm-hmm. And we want all that worked out. I used to joke that one of the big advantages of drone-based delivery and like what Electrotech is doing, which is e-mobility and advanced mobility, both for cargo and for people, is no pedestrians. At least, we don't have to worry about that. And then we met a potential customer called Jetpack Aviation, and I'm like, oh, no. Are you guys going to create pedestrians in the sky? Because I was really looking forward to no pedestrians. Because, animals and people on the ground are one of the reasons why your car is not self-driving right now. If everyone would just stay away, your car could easily self-drive. It's not the city streets that are the problem. It's the living things in the city streets that are the problem. So that kind of incrementalism has to happen.
I thought it was all the other drivers, because everybody else is a bad driver. I'm a great driver.
So how about in space? I know there's no pedestrians in space. I'm at this point fairly confident.
There's a lot of junk. And for better or worse, I think for worse, we haven't been very, very good stewards of the low Earth orbit environment. And so, many tens or hundreds of thousands of pieces of debris up there.
So is that an opportunity? If there are entrepreneurs in the audience, removal of space junk?
Yeah, if you can find the world's largest Hoover, like Dyson, there are indeed. Mechanism to remove space debris on an economically sustainable way, you will make a lot of money. But we have this interesting, I was thinking about what you were saying about why we overhype some things. And what's interesting to me is that we overhype things when either the ability to move and manipulate information outruns our ability to move and manipulate molecules, or vice versa, right? And so you couldn't really see the Transcontinental Railroad expand until you had a telegraph and a standard timing system. Otherwise, trains would be crashing into each other. It's a different time in Dayton than it is in Springfield, than it is in like, what's going on here? You have to standardize and move the information system forward. We do have some Jetsons like things. The iPhone is an amazing thing. It just, we were able to move information around and manipulate information in a much more comprehensive way. And I think we weren't going to have flying cars until you could build the underlying information system so that your car is aware enough inside the car of what to do. And that we now have the ability to fly drones and swarm and avoid other things and know micro weather and those kinds of things. So these things are pushing each other forward. And right now in orbital debris, it's both. We lack information and we lack sort of the ability to manipulate hardware and molecules and move things to go get stuff in a way that's economically viable. So you can work on either part of those problems in orbital debris, and if you're innovative, you will find success.
Scott, anything jump to mind? Certainly AI's never been overhyped, right?
It's one of the most overhyped. I mean, it's the term du jour, and I hear it all the time. And I'm simple. I just keep it simple. And I say, okay, what's the difference between autonomy or automation and AI? And I usually tell people that automation is when I can send up a drone or a sensor package or something like that, get to it, lay in its route, get to its point, take the pictures, movies, whatever, come back. It doesn't need a pilot. It doesn't need a lot of oversight. AI, on the other hand, takes all of that drone or sensor information and starts making decisions on it. What should the next mission planning look like? What is the next air traffic order? What does this mean in context? What else do I need? And things that the human would normally make decisions about, that's what AI is. It's not just sending things out. And the other thing is people, in general, think that AI is just automating an existing process. So just looking at your example, it's not, right? You have to have a new architecture. You have to have a new way of thinking about it. You have new policies, new regulations, and some of the government services do want to do that, but they want to do it well. They understand that it takes a lot to create something from scratch. Right, but I do see it overblown, and people say, oh, yeah, AI, ML, we'll just apply that. A lot of companies, yeah, we apply AI, ML. And I think to myself, no, you really don't. But it's okay.
But we just want to say we do.
Yeah, a lot of people want to say it.
Every startup needs to say that now. So interesting as you guys talked through that, one of the things that really jumps out is a lot of bringing sci-fi to life is about computational power, right? Raw computational power so that you can have decision-making software, so you can integrate sensor data, so, all the kinds of things. You can manipulate molecules. And I think unless you've been living under a rock, you've heard Intel is building a giant plant dedicated to fundamentally computational power, right? That's what that plant is going to produce, is computational power for things, and Dayton's into making things. Are there other elements in what I call the physics of technology where there are bottlenecks, short supplies, opportunities for people to jump in? Are there elements like that in your fields bringing sci-fi to life will enable? Like for Electrotech, our flying car startup, you think about what's necessary. Oh my gosh, there's so much hardware, and it's different hardware. Yes, they're still technically aircraft, but they're not traditional aircraft. That's kind of the whole point of electric aviation, is they can look kind of weird for an airplane, right? And you think about all the different just things that have to be fabricated to exacting standards to enable that to happen. What are some of the issues that in the physics side of things really stack up to enable some of the sci-fi things that are in our future?
Yeah, materials for me is everything. And, University of Dayton, AFRL, this is one of the best places in the world to study, develop, test, engineer materials, right? I mean, you might design the perfect aircraft, But if you can't make the material light enough, it can't fly. You might have a great battery, but it might weigh 4,000 pounds, and that's not going to fly. You might want to be able to join dissimilar materials, and it's really hard to figure out how do I weld plastic to stainless steel, as it's a kind of a dumb example, right? So for me, right after computational power comes the ability to design, implement, manufacture, and manipulate materials, and knowing that what you make out of that stuff isn't going to fail. Right? This is really a challenge in additive manufacturing, because that's all great, but we understand casting, we understand machining, but when you additively manufacture something, how do you know that part's going to be as good as the one you just made before and the one you made before that? So my answer is materials.
100% batteries for us. I think Elon Musk offered $1 million for somebody to come up with a better battery, like something else out there in order to carry energy. 5G has a potential to do energy through the air. That's something that would really be a game changer. But yeah, that's the biggest thing for us is batteries, battery technology, for sure.
The threesome here, that I have to agree, materials is going to be one of the drivers. We need to make advances in materials in order to get to where we want to go. Without it, we're gonna just hit or miss. And I further believe that there are ways that we can accelerate the materials and additive manufacturing, new processes for material manufacturing, but then also focus on, if we have these new materials, what happens to the supply chain, right? The supply line to get to those new materials. Obviously, one of the drivers for Intel doing their plant is that we have a chip shortage. Why do we have a chip shortage? Why didn't anyone see that we would have a chip shortage, and or all of the other materials that go into batteries, or lithium or other rare elements? We shouldn't be in that situation. We should have enough information to recognize that these things will happen.
You also have behemoths in the gas industry that actively work to prevent new technologies that would be like electric and batteries too, which is it's
Collective
not just,
gasp from the audience, please.
Yeah, I know everybody's shocked, but yeah, that's something you have to fight against too.
Yeah, no, there's entrenched players that have a lot of dough that don't want certain aspects of sci-fi to come to life because it wrecks their business model.
Electric cars have been around since the 80s. I mean, it's nothing new, and they were popular
Actually, since
too.
the 30s, I think.
Right, actually, since the
One of
30s.
One
if
of
you go
Abraham
back.
Lincoln's most famous cases that he took on had to do with the right-of-way of steamboats versus railroads in the river, right? Could you build a bridge across the river? Because you got a pier in the river and a steamboat might hit it. So these have been going on, as you said, a long time.
So the materials emphasis is interesting to me because materials and batteries, which unless you beam it through the air, ends up being materials, right, at the end of the day. And then the thought about supply chain, I'm going to link that to space. So is space going to be a reliable supply chain for us for some of the materials we need to enable some of this new technology?
So space is an enabler. I really don't see us launching, let's say, lead on the space shuttle and some magical thing happens and it comes back as gold. I don't think that's really going to happen. There might be some instances where...
I got to call my broker. Hang on just a second.
Yeah, even if you did that in the shuttle days, I don't think it would have been cost effective. I think you would have lost money. So there may be a few things that we actually manufacture in space and bring back. What space is going to enable is our ability to do new kinds of research that will say, oh, aha, because we went to space, we learned more about how these, I'll use a different example, lipid nanoparticles actually work and can be optimized for the delivery of remedial effects in mRNA vaccines. And then we plug that back in on the ground. Aha! In space, I can see that this nematode, which is eating all the corn in the world, has a gravity vector sense because when it took it to space, it got confused. And it didn't know how to attack the root, and it just started not attacking the place it was supposed to be, kind of random walk. Let's figure out what gene in the nematode is responsible for that gravity vector, and let's see if we can figure out how to get that out of there and make corn more prosperous. So it's kind of you remember the BASF commercials? We don't make X, we make X better. And so I see a lot of the work that we're going to do in low Earth orbit in research following that, where you might not make, a super new, you might not invent flubber. There I go. How old are we? But you might learn something about how flubber's made on the ground that then gets driven into the economy at scale, that either is a super vitamin or a super painkiller towards making life better and making some money.
Nice. And I'm going to call dibs on Confused Nematodes as a name for a band. What about hauling in the rocks? We see all these movies with space miners. We're going to go get some asteroids, and then we'll have all the lithium we need because there's just a rock full of lithium somewhere out there. Is that true? Is there potential there, or is that all just?
So is there potential? Yeah, but that's going to be more like Lewis and Clark, right? I'm not going to want to haul everything I need to the moon to make my habitat. I'm going to want to learn how to use the stuff on the moon to make my habitat, and that might be a new material process, 3D printing from lunar regolith, or whatever it happens to be. The cost right now, and again, the information, it's much cheaper to beam information back and forth through space than it is to send molecules back and forth through space. That's crazy hard right now. And until that gets easier, and you see people working on it, you see Elon Musk building Starship, and you see lots of launch vehicle companies, but until we really can cut the cost and become much more flexible and reliable and able to move things back and forth through space, the things that you find out there are going to be the things you use out there: water, oxygen, can I make rocket fuel, as opposed to hauling it all with you. Imagine if Lewis and Clark had to take everything with them to Oregon, including the oxygen they breathe and the water they drink. They would have just never made it.
Interesting. So that kind of perspective, right, isn't what gets written up in the press, right? That's not what people talk about. So in that vein, as you think about some of the sci-fi you're involved in bringing to life, what's like some obscure fact about it, or some like insider pro tip about it that people might not be aware of that would be maybe interesting if they're thinking about getting into that space? Now, I'll go first with Electrotech. It turns out that it's really hard. Like really, really hard. Like you'd think, we have airplanes today. We had gas-powered cars, and we're going to just make them be electric cars. Great. And now we have airplanes. We're just going to make them electric airplanes. What's the big deal, right? But when you stack it up, the interplay between the design of an airframe, the location of the propulsion units, the freedom of design that electrification of that powertrain enables, all of the power storage considerations and battery considerations and weight, right? And power, stored power equals weight. Stored power equals more range, but stored power equals weight, and weight equals less range, right? And so you end up in these crazy design loops, and then you need redundancy in the air to a level you don't really need on the ground, and you start to add all these things up, and you're like, no wonder it's taken so long to get flying things in the air, just zipping about, and even drones without people, you have way more complexity, I think, right, than people appreciate. So the obscure thing that nobody writes about when they write their flying car article is, holy crow, there is just a boatload of engineering that still needs to be done before anybody, other than who's been CGI'd in some really hilarious videos, anybody's climbing into something and routinely flying it around, right? So there's some tempering of expectations, but there's also tremendous opportunity in that complexity and in that engineering difficulty for people to come in and solve problems. But let's start from the other end, just to mix it up a little. What are the opportunities you see, kind of the pro tip insider view of what's going on in AI?
I don't know if I have pro tips, but I think that there are a lot of opportunities, and kind of bringing it back to the Dayton area, it is learning about what is currently going on, thinking about how it could go on, and then creating your pathway from point A to point B, and becoming passionate about developing what it takes in order to get there. If we didn't have Lewis and Clark, we never would have discovered Oregon and so on. So we need those Lewis and Clark people to say, you know what, I'm going to go out here and I'm going to see what's there. I don't know what's out there yet, but I'll find out. At least that's my goal and objective. But going back to kind of the car thing, it amazes me that, people say, why don't we already have cars? And like, there's not a learning curve, right? We give temporary licenses to 15-and-a-half-year-olds. And yeah, they're considered a driver at 16, but are they a good driver? Probably not. They need a little bit of experience. They need, and then later on, they become a, quote, good, well, maybe a good driver, we hope. But it's a little bit, if you think about it, what we put into their hands at 15 and a half, I mean, it's incredible how much trust that we, but it's worked. It's worked for us as a society to get transportation, get you to where you need to go. And we need some more of that kind of trust. And we can talk about trusted systems and all the nefarious things that can happen in all of these different systems and how they need to be hardened and hack-proof and things of that nature. But in order to make real progress, we need to be able to have a little faith and have a little hope. And ideal is to say, I want to go there and figure out how to get there.
I agree with that. 100%. That's the biggest problem with AI, is that people don't trust machines. And I think all of us, driving is a great example. Who doesn't think that at this point that autonomous cars would be safer than cars driven by people who are drunk, by underage people, by people without insurance? Like, it's a free-for-all. And one day we're going to laugh about it, but it's really just a trust issue. It's just an amazing thing that we as a society just want to claw back to the way it was. And I was reading an article recently about organ donation, and organs mostly come from car accidents. And they're talking about how when cars are autonomous, there won't be any more car accidents. You're going to have a shortage of organs. Like, that's how safe it's going to be. And you have a lot of that with, back in the day, with elevators. Elevators used to be manual, and there were accidents all the time. People don't realize that. They would drop all the time. Guy had a bad day, he was drunk, that was the end of everybody in that car, and they did automated elevators, and people specifically chose the one with the guy in it, thinking it was safer than the automated elevator. And this went on forever. When they were building buildings, they're like, people aren't going to be in this one without a guy in it. And you still have that. I think humans are just so afraid to trust technology. It's a remarkable thing. As far as ours, I don't really have any insights into, what would change drone, technology. It's really just, at this point, the technology is sound. It's really just about the regulations. But I get a lot of people saying, like, oh, they're going to fall out of the sky. You're going to have accidents all the time. And you have to realize, like, the amount of effort that we've gone through to make our drone airworthy with the FAA, down to every single component that's on there, every supplier that supplies that component. This drone is just as safe as a 747. It's the exact same certificate that we're working towards. It's a type design certificate with the FAA. And that's what I hope people get over, that fear of that this is gonna crash, just like when they see a helicopter fly over. Nobody thinks, oh, this is gonna land on me. It might be noisy, but that is something I think people have to get over. And I think COVID helped with that. People are now much more understanding of drone technology and wanting the drones because they're contactless. But that's one thing I would give insight into, that this will be the safest form of delivery out there. You will not have Amazon drivers. I see them going the wrong way down a one-way street, doing whatever they can do to get delivery on time. You will never have a drone making reckless choices. It will be, safe, and it will be consistent.
So a couple thoughts spring to mind from that. One is, I trust that human stupidity will always supply organs. So I hope that,
The Darwin Awards
that
will
works
still
out.
be there.
Yeah, somehow, some way it'll happen. The elevator comment, though, is really interesting to me because it speaks to the issue of bridging, right? Like, sometimes society, like, the tech is ready and society isn't ready, right? And so why did they have people in fully automated elevators push the button for you? Because they were used to somebody operating the elevator for them, and that made it, and then finally, after a while, people stopped having elevator operators, but there was a substantial, right, overlap period there. And so that's interesting to think about from an entrepreneurial opportunity standpoint, helping bridge the social and psychological aspects of technology adoption is as much an opportunity as providing the hardcore technology side of it.
Yeah, the seat belt. So I have a 54 Chevy and a 2013 Volkswagen Touareg. The 54 Chevy didn't come with seat belts. And it wasn't that was a hard technology to put into a car. It just took everybody a decade and a half to figure out click it or ticket, put your seat belt on. You know, when I was a kid, you're standing on the hump of the back, and the faster you went around the corner, the more you liked it, because you could, slam into your brother in the back seat or whatever. And now, you put a young child in a car seat, you forget to buckle them in, and the minute you put it in take it out of park, they scream like, I'm not buckled in. You're like, okay, good, this is good, and thank you for warning me on that. So a lot of it is what you say, it's the adaptation. And that reminds me that you don't have to be, we're talking about some very technical things up here, but you don't have to be a technologist to add value, because we need innovation in business models, we need innovation in transaction models, we need innovation in finance, we need innovation in marketing, communications. These are enterprises that require every kind of skill in order to be successful. Otherwise, you have a nice piece of technology, but you don't have a product that makes its way into what I'll call an industrialization phase, where everybody's using it and it's got supply chain and it's got broader impacts than just the coolness of the technology.
Yeah, the seatbelt example is a great one because Lee Iacocca, who ran Chrysler, was a big proponent later in his life of seatbelts, and he wrote all this stuff about seatbelts, but he didn't like airbags. And he was like against airbags. And it was like, my God, now you look at it like, how could you ever, I wouldn't even get in. I'm sorry, I would never drive in your 54. If it doesn't have airbags, I am not getting in.
Non-collapsible steering column and a metal dashboard, so that you're in really good shape. So don't hit anything.
So yeah, it's, I agree with you. There's like a transition period, and the new technology is coming in, encroaching as you're trying to adapt to the first one. You're still having naysayers who are in that, trying to move that other technology forward. So.
Yeah. Well, people complain about those hot rod Model A's, driving crazy down their city streets, right? Mm-hmm. When they were used to horses, and there was actually, this is true, more or less, that there were great concerns when they were building the railroad that if you were in a rail car and it went more than 20 miles an hour, you would suffocate because the air would be rushing by you so fast you would not be able to breathe properly.
Funny story, my grandmother was in Russia in this big town, and they had one car in the whole town, and that car ran over her dog. And ever since, she has always been against cars.
Those rotten automobiles.
We don't want any more cars.
Wow.
Let's talk too about just other examples, ATMs, and how they were not adopted by the elderly population at the time. But now what can you do? You can Zelle, you can Venmo, you can have E-Trade and whatever kind of accounts that you want. You don't need to establish relationships. I haven't been inside a bank for 5 years, and I'm thankful.
You're not missing anything, I can tell you.
I'm thankful, right?
But if you do go in, you do find people there that can help you with a transaction. So it's not like they've eliminated the jobs of the tellers. The people that are in the bank are much more comprehensive in terms of the services they can provide you, and they're there for the things that are not the routine transactions, where the value add of having a person there is a good thing, right?
Right. If I, wanted to start a company and wanted to talk to them about a business loan, or, that's what they're there for, right? And from a societal standpoint, they've identified early adopters, right? And I think there's 4 different kind of subgroups to the population, but early adopters is one. And I usually flip that and say, let's give them something to adopt, right? Because they want to, and then you can have your quantitative analysis of, did it work? What kind of consequences were there from having this there? On the elevator, nobody lost their lives because somebody pressed a button. And it wasn't the elevator operator, right? So there weren't those consequences.
Yep. So on that, I have a theory, and it may be completely nonsense, but for me personally, it might be true, which is it's somehow more satisfying to die due to my own stupidity than from a software glitch. Like, that's why people want to drive their own car instead of have an automated car. That's what, there's something about human psychology that is like, I'll be accountable. I don't want to some people don't like to fly because they don't like to turn their life over to a pilot. Even though it's the safest mode of transportation, probably safer than walking, right? I mean, it's really safe way to get around. What do you see as kind of are there major psychological obstacles to the adoption of some of the technologies you're involved in? And what are they?
Information not moving as fast as decisions need to be made, right? So there comes a point where the information flow coming into us as humans exceeds what we can process, right? But that's not necessarily true with the increase in computational power for other systems to be able to do that. And it's that space, that span, where we start getting uncomfortable because it's doing it and we don't really understand what's going on. We feel like it might be a little bit chaotic or out of control. And we're control people, right? We like to be in control, or at least the perception of control, I think is probably the better term. And sometimes if you give over, though, that trust in something, some people have a hard time doing that, and that's where that adoption comes in my opinion.
Yeah, for us, some people are still afraid of drones watching them. I can't even believe people still think that we would spend our time trying to monitor what people are doing in their backyards. But that's something I think that's difficult to overcome. When we were at Kroger, there was one woman that came up to us and was like, if you think you're flying this over my backyard, I'm gonna shoot it out of the sky. And I said, well, this is a federally registered aircraft. So if you shoot this out of the sky, you're gonna go to federal prison. I don't know if you know what that's like. And she just huffed off. And I'm like, it's gonna take one person doing that. It's the same as if you're shot down a helicopter. It all sounds great. Yeah, go and do that. Let's see what happens to you. And that is where our surveillance actually is going to be really useful when we have those pictures of you shooting at us. But that's something that I think is going away in a lot of places, especially major cities. I think people have given up their privacy completely. Even now when we use our phones, we just don't expect anything to really be private. But I think you still have some of the rural communities out there where they think that drones are going to be taking pictures of their property. That's something that I think people will just have to get over. If they see a drone flying by, whatever, it's just like a helicopter flying by.
And people are, say two things about humans in general, and I'm subject to this a lot. We're not always the best judges of risk and reward, even when we know what's in our best interests. And then we are also often super susceptible to information regardless of the source. And so I think you have to continue to articulate in a way that's accessible and understandable what the real risks of the situation are, and then try as hard as you can to put out as much quality information as you can, accurate information, verifiable information, so that other interests who may not share your interests don't overwhelm with information that, let's say, might not be quite as accurate or might be intended to or misinform.
Yeah. Dominating getting the story you want to tell out over the noise or the stories others want to tell. I want to take just a little break here and see if anybody's got any questions, because we can just keep going. This is a lot of fun, and we can, but I want to, before I move into my next set of questions, kind of shift topic areas a little bit. Anybody have any comments, questions, contributions?
Hello, my name is Solomon. I'm a senior at UDA right now. I have a lot of higher level big things like studying how you can make flying cars type of thing. And I know those require a lot of investors and stuff like that. Where's a good place to start, if you're in my position, because I don't have the credibility to just be like, hey, listen, I have a really good idea, and here's some of the control systems that go into it, but like no investor is going to want to be like completely on my side if I have an idea like that.
Sure, and so I'm gonna start by answering semi-facetiously, which is 2 years ago, you should have just made a really cool CAD-generated video and claimed you were worth $200 million and gone and raised some money, right? And some fool probably would have written that check because there was this e-aviation gold rush craziness that went on a couple of years back. Now the environment has changed, and Beth, I'd be really interested to get your perspective on this too, because those spaces, the drones and the passenger stuff certainly overlap a great deal from an investor interest perspective. But if you have ideas that are kind of technically oriented ideas about e-aviation, I don't know that now is a very good time to start an aircraft company, right? If you're
Ideas in general, like broad ideas. So like, say I want to start a machine learning like company or
oh, sure.
company, like, and I just don't have that credibility like right now.
No, you don't. That's right. No offense, I don't know you at all. I don't need to know you, right? Because people in it, like in most industries, someone's inside an industry, they assume if you're not inside the industry, you just don't get it, right? And they're reluctant to let people from other industries come in and change the paradigm of the industry that they've grown up in and protected, right? So, building relationships with companies in the industry, right? And this is a pretty good town to actually do that in, right? So let's just say, or you say something about control systems. So maybe you have some control systems innovations or some avionics innovations or things like that. You find the Carissa Theodores of the world, she's back there somewhere with venture leader for Electrotech, or Beth, or folks like that, and just start to have some conversations, right? This is a pretty accessible town, generally speaking, I'd like to think. And you can look also at different levels in the supply chain, right? You got people who are airframers, and by my estimate, 750 to 800 electric aviation vehicles under development right now. 650 of them are vertical takeoff and landing, and the other 150 are short takeoff or something else. Okay, there's no way even a substantial portion of those companies are all going to survive, right? But they all have technical challenges. But then there's the tier one supply chain people. Who's supplying their motors and motor controllers? Who's supplying their batteries? Because most of them aren't making their own. Who's supplying their avionics packages, or are they developing those themselves, right? Where are the toeholds for your ideas? Where do they fit into that aircraft? And who's working in that area of the aircraft? Where are those players? Where do they sit? Is it propulsion? Wherever it is, there's going to be probably not more than 3, 4, 5 significant players next step down in the airframe, from the airframe. Right, so you might have 800 companies developing aircraft. If you look at who's serious about electric propulsion, probably no more than 5 companies that are seriously focused on just electric propulsion and supplying electric propulsion to the rest of the industry. It's kind of like, now I'm really going to date myself, video cameras. Like back when you used to hold an object called a video camera up and you would like take moving pictures of people. There were only 2 companies in the world that made all the guts of the probably 300 brands of video cameras that were out there at some point, right? And so there's not that many really core technology suppliers. So long-winded answer, but my advice would be if you have ideas, find the people who are actually active in that technology versus the people that have the shiny models and animations on their website and are out trying to raise money off some fantastical valuation that they made up, pulled out of the air. Sorry, my biases are showing in that answer.
So we just did our seed round in November. We closed, and we are doing our Series A now. And I just have to say that raising money is the hardest thing that I've ever done in my entire life. And I built this business, we bootstrapped this business, did it all ourselves, had Kroger, the largest grocery chain, a full-blown partnership, full integration into them, all their stores, and I still was struggling to raise money, especially because of what how many people had lost money, not 5 years ago in aviation. But you can go to an entrepreneur center, you can Google online about how to make a slide deck, how to do all these things. You do not need to get an entrepreneur in residence or have anybody telling you all these little details. You can Google that all yourselves about how to present yourself and make sure that you get your idea down, you describe what the problem is and how you have a solution for it. But the number one way you're gonna raise money is through connections. It's reaching out to every person you've ever spoken to. All of us have that one uncle somewhere that did something cool. You don't really talk to them. You spoke to them 5 years ago. You have to gird your loins and call people that you would never call. People that are second and third connections on LinkedIn. You've got to embarrass yourself. Go out there, be like, this is what I'm doing. I see you're working at Lockheed Martin. Can you maybe get me in, even if he's just an engineer there? Can you maybe help me get through this company? That's all there is. It is not about the technology. That is something that I learned. They don't even care who your customers are. It's who you know. Unfortunately, a lot of people who've gone to really great universities have these alumni programs which are really helpful. I went to a state university, so I didn't have that same level of alumni like UD does. My God, you could go through UD and find connections into any single industry that you ever want, and they want to help you. That's the most amazing thing. So if I were starting completely from scratch and I just had an idea, and which I did when we started this drone thing, my first job was at Payne Weber, and my boss left to found a company called Vonage, which I'm sure all of you have heard of, and I laughed at him at the time. I'm like, you're gonna go, what are you gonna do, a phone company with your friend? Like, this is Payne Weber. It's been around for 100 years. Now, Payne Weber was eventually bought by UBS, but he was my first phone call, and I hadn't spoken to him in probably 15 years. And I called him and I said, Lou, you gotta help me. I have something here. I just don't know what it is. He came to my office, because people want to help you. That's the amazing thing. People are going to want to help. And he said, look, you've got this. We had this radio. We didn't have the drone. He said, which is harder, to make this radio that makes these drones work or to build a drone? I said, the radio is much harder. He said, then hire somebody, make the drone, make a solution, and go out there. And because I didn't know either, just like you might know you're onto something, you can smell it in the water, you just don't know what it is. So that's what I tell everybody. If you're not willing to embarrass yourself and get in front of somebody who might make you feel like a total loser, you're not up for what it takes to be the CEO or run a company. Because when I went through raising, these investors were brutal. I mean, they tear you apart, they tear your company apart, they tear your industry apart. You walk away from these meetings thinking like totally unsteady, and you have another meeting in a minute to start all over again with a different VC that you're talking to, and you've got to get it all back together. You can't. I used to be a crier that all that all was gone. I just can't even possibly get that emotional about anything. I even had an investor whose son actually came down while we were talking, and his son was giving it to me also about the idea. So if you're going to start, you got to be strong. You got to really believe in what you're doing. You have to listen to people if they tell you something's bad. We thought we were going to work in construction. We thought that was the big thing. I went to a friend of mine a friend of a friend who ran a construction company, and he just looked at me and he said, I would never want to own this. Why would I ever own this? Because I don't even own my bulldozers. He goes, you make this a service, you fly it, I don't have to think about it, I'll do that. And that's really what changed us as a company. I listened. I didn't say, oh, what does this guy know? I just want to sell this, get it out of here, let somebody else, I need to worry about this. That, if you're still at UD now, that alumni is everything. You have to just talk to everyone, and it's all going to help you understand how to do this and how to keep talking to people and how not to be embarrassed. But there have been amazing people out there with incredible technology. If they can't sell it, you've never seen it. So just keep practicing talking to people over and over all day long. That's the best advice I can give. I'm sorry, I can,
No,
I'm very
that's great. But I
encouraging
will
on
say,
this.
as a state school grad, I will say the advantage we have, Beth, is if we want someone to watch a football game with, we got plenty of
That's
options.
true. That is
Yes.
true. For sports,
So,
yes.
Yeah. The other thing, though, that your comments made me think of that's relevant to your question, right, is understand what differentiates your solution. Like in your case, it wasn't the drone. It was the radio, right? And I think about drones in particular. I don't know, have you ever been to AUVSI, the AUVSI show?
I haven't been to them, but we've heard
Like,
of them, yeah.
If you want to find purposeless quadcopters galore,
That's why we don't go to them.
go to that show. It's like everybody's got a quadcopter looking for some purpose for it. And it's like, aren't you supposed to understand what you're trying to accomplish before you go get the money and build something?
Yeah, and know exactly, nobody's gonna tell you how to use it or come up with an idea. Tesla, one thing that I learned that was pretty interesting is that you're supposed to choose an industry that's really, really small, like a very small subset of an industry to start. So when Tesla, when he started, he chose the higher end cars, the luxury cars. And you and I think like, oh, well, he was thinking that people will spend the money on electric cars if they're luxury. He didn't. It's because it's the smallest market that there is in cars, in the automotive world. That's
It was
why
still
he
on
chose
back
it.
order.
Right, but it's amazing. Most people didn't realize that.
You know, Solomon, one thing that I always tell my students when they come, they say, have an idea. I say, that's great. It's probably a good idea, but your hardest part is going to be explaining it. So I tell them to go download a one-page piece of paper called the Heilmeier Catechism, Heilmeier Catechism. It's like 8 or 9 questions. Heilmeier was the director of DARPA, and it's how they go about assessing whether the proposals that go to DARPA have a prayer of being funded or not. And they're pretty simple questions, like, what are you trying to do? How is it being done now? What are the roadblocks in how it's being done now, and how is what you want to do going to make it better? If you're successful, who will care? How much is it going to cost? And how will you know when you're sort of on your way whether you're on the right track? I can't remember all the questions. I would encourage anybody that's got an idea either for a company or maybe it's just a new way of, guidance, navigation, and control algorithm or whatever, to never stop answering those questions. And sometimes, and I'm mindful of the panel that was on before, it seemed like all of those professional food cooks who just made me hungry listening to them, they sort of answered those questions, but the how was it being done now, they got that from being in someone else's restaurant and seeing how it was done, not learning from the inside, not necessarily the outside. So sometimes your best path to starting your own company is to get into somebody else's company and add value to them and figure out exactly what they're doing, not without lifting their trade secrets and going somewhere else, but understanding where the brokes are so that your ideas, you say, oh, I see how I can make this better. I understand exactly what I'm trying to do. And you can't use any jargon. If you say, well, I'm trying to, pick a lingo, and every industry has it, you need to scrub all that out so that, between the 3 of us, 4 of us, your grandmother, friends in your dorm or wherever, somebody you meet at Starbucks, they get it. Heilmeier Catechism, it's super useful. Especially if you're talking to DoD people. They all know who it is. Everybody at FRL probably knows what that is.
Wow, that was a great question. That kicked off some really interesting discussion. Thank you. Anybody else got anything right now? Oh, I see multiple hands. All right.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm an engineer. I love technology. I think it's really cool. There are a lot of ways to, change the world using technology. The question I wrestle with a lot is, the for the better part. Are we changing the world for the better? And I think, as technologies have matured and we've learned, especially, some of the big social media ones, we've learned, hey, maybe they aren't for the betterment of society and stuff like that. So I'm just interested in, you know, when y'all see a new technology or working with something, what are your guts telling you, and what are those things you're looking for when you're like, hey, this thing is gonna really have a positive impact versus, I don't know, this could take society someplace a little funky.
That's a terrific question, and actually, what, you know, unintended consequences of bringing sci-fi to life is one of the things that we're going to talk a little bit more about as we go here. But I'll answer your question in a very generic way, and then let these guys maybe answer more specifically. There are two sides to a coin every time you do a technological advance, right? Whether it's creating winners and losers, or whether it's, I don't think I've ever seen a technological advance that was unalloyed goodness to all people, right? Somebody somewhere is going to be unhappy that technology advanced, or somebody somewhere is going to be richer, somebody somewhere is going to be poorer, somebody somewhere is going to be happier, somebody somewhere is going to be sadder. And what we know is change is going to happen. So what's incumbent on us as technologists is to try to make it happen where the net positive outweighs the net negative, and then other entrepreneurs are going to come around and deal with the net negative, right? And fix some of the things we broke with our latest technological advance. And that helps me feel better about it, knowing that there are people smarter than me out there that are going to come by and clean up after me as another set of entrepreneurial opportunities. That's kind of my perspective on it, but anybody else want to jump in there?
I mean, there's just no such thing as unmitigated good. It just doesn't exist. And so I think you have to look at, is this bring the greatest good for the greatest number? And then what are the consequences of, you know, what are the adverse consequences, and what strategies do you have to address those, right? And not everybody's going to agree. The market may disagree with your ethos, right? Other people may have no problem with it. So there's not an answer to that question. But that is the right question. And it reminds me, as a technologist, that there's a huge amount of ethical and moral dimension to technology, right? I grew up working in the space program, right? And some of the people I went to work with at Marshall Space Flight Center in 1987 came from a place called Peenemünde. And they were part of the German rocket team. They fought for the Nazi army and built weapons for the Nazi regime. And there they were. They were the fathers of the Saturn V that took us to the moon. And there I was, working with them, eating in the cafeteria with some of them. You always have a moral and ethical dimension to what you're doing when you're a technologist, and you can't escape it. So you've got to think through it very carefully. Sometimes it can be deeply personal, but there's always some deleterious impact, even with the greatest, you know, piece of new sliced bread, right? You're going to have to work through it.
So for me, it seems like, the way that I view it anyway, is technology is like data. Data is neither good nor bad. It's just informative. And technology can be used for good, but it can equally be used for nefarious purposes. That aside, there are unintended consequences that often arise. So how do you build an ecosystem or that technology to live within that ecosystem that makes it resilient to breaking, resilient to being brittle? How do you reduce those unintended consequences? By thinking through all of the, you know, potential combinations in which it could be used. And then even from a larger standpoint, you know, does the access to blue screens change the human brain development in children, right? It goes on and on and on. But those are the kinds of things to think about. It's not if it will be good or bad, it will be both. It's just to what degree we allow it to be both.
I think it's also something that's not going to be obvious, and one of the saddest examples for me is plastic. Because plastic came about because environmentalists were saying we were destroying all the trees. So they came up with a solution, and plastic has destroyed the world. It's destroyed our oceans, it's destroyed everything. And here they thought they were doing something good. They were saving the trees. So it's in that moment, you might not even know what you're doing is right. You might be coming up with a new way to farm that shuts down all the other farms, and then it turns out that those vegetables are not as good for some reason or cause cancer. Like, you don't have any idea. There's no real way to know, even if you're doing right or wrong.
That's a really good point, Beth. You know, the unintended consequences piece of this is a really interesting dilemma. And the more sci-fi it is, right, the more it's really hard to anticipate what outcomes might be. And even if you can anticipate an outcome, you're not sure whether that outcome is good or bad. And I'll use, you know, genetic manipulation as a great example, CRISPR technology. And those of you that know me know CRISPR just kind of drives me wild. I get on my CRISPR soapbox, but, you know, CRISPR is going to be the end of the human race, right? Because we're going to evolve into something that we're not right now through genetic manipulation technology. Now, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? It depends kind of how fond you are of who we are now and how fond you are of who we might be, what we might become as a species. But it won't be Homo sapiens anymore. So it's really hard when you think about unintended consequences. So before we get to the next question, I know it's a bit of an oxymoronic question to say, what unintended consequences do you anticipate, right? Because you don't. But are there like maybe some areas in the technologies you're working in that you think are like, we don't really understand what's going to happen there. That's an area that that something's going to happen and we're going to figure it out. We just don't know what it is yet.
Yeah, like chemotherapy. In 50 years, people are going to be like, can you believe we did this to our, like, it's going to be like bloodletting. It's going to be like a joke once we figure out how to cure cancer, that we radiated whole bodies with this poison. Yeah, it's going to be amazing when you look back.
Anything jump to mind for Scott, John?
I don't really want to be a GMO myself. Modified, I think evolution will, do in due course. But nothing really jumps out as far as a gotcha or whatever. I'm kind of going back to our last one, is like they wouldn't have developed DDT if they knew what the consequences were, right? Their intent was to, have a benefit for agriculture and higher yields and, things of that nature. The unintended consequences are the wow kind of factors, and you can only think about so many of them. And in the airline industry, they talk about, well, I could get on a plane that didn't have a pilot because we have the capability of flying it from point A to point B, but I'm not going to do it because there are unintended situations that were not thought about in advance by a software programmer or by a group of people, that you get into the Sully Sullenberger kind of situation.
What's a duck doing at this altitude?
Yeah, exactly. And you can have all the duck warning systems you want. It doesn't change the circumstance.
Yeah, in space, the thing that I think we deal with all the time is almost anything you do has dual purpose. So, it may be a good example of this is the Hubble Space Telescope. We borrowed a shipping container from a classified program to move the space telescope from California to Florida before we launched it, right? All that technology came out of spy satellites, right? Now that went from one way to the other way, from a DoD use to a civilian science use. And it wasn't a kinetic thing. It wasn't like designed to kill bad guys more dead faster. It was just so you could see what was going on. But everything has a dual use. And we're not real good at figuring out where that line is sometimes. We're not real good at figuring out how to protect versus share. And so we have to be mindful of that in space. And so, anything we build, you want to build a new rocket, great. It's an ICBM. That's how it got started, was to deliver a nuclear weapon across a continent or deliver a weapon over the horizon. So we worry about that a lot.
Cool. So you folks out there that are philosophy majors and, wondering where you fit into all this technology stuff, there you go. Become a technology ethicist and help us steer through the waters. I saw another hand go up.
Thanks. My name is Ryan Smithwright. I'm a data engineering manager at Salesforce in residence here. Thanks for your leadership and thanks for being here. I want to focus your brain power and maybe your reach on an issue that is a personal interest to me and I have some visibility on. AI safety is becoming a topic that I think deserves quite a bit of attention. You've all had some good things to say about the power of technology. I like to think all things powerful could be very good or very bad, right? So nuclear power could be very good or very bad, and so we talk about nuclear proliferation. And most people don't, they think we shouldn't control technology until they think about that. And so, well, then it seems obvious. You shouldn't be able to Google how to build this. Well, what should we be able to Google about, how to build AI? And it turns out that I'll wrap up here quick. I promise. I have an idea and I have some questions. It turns out that you have to give up some freedom if you want protection. And so we give up the freedom to drive anonymously because cars are powerful. They can be very good and they can be very dangerous. The easiest way to kill somebody, right? So you can't get on a road without being anonymous, or anonymously. You can't get on a plane anonymously. So what should corporations and governments do to support AI safety? And I'd like to propose an idea, maybe for a forum and maybe for your reach, which is that I think autonomous agents, I think AI that simply is a pattern recognition, that's if this, then that, and then stops, is like a nuclear reactor that winds down and doesn't explode. But autonomous AI can explode. And so I'd like to propose that maybe our public data pipelines, our internet, we think about like roads. And so autonomous agents we could require to have a license plate. So should we have license plates, unique IDs on autonomous agents, and have the right to pull over any that don't have one? And what should corporations and governments do to support AI safety? Thanks for letting me say a lot of things.
I'm not going first on this one.
Now, you bring up an important topic, and it kind of goes, in line with you can use technology for good or you can use it for bad. How do you prevent it from being used nefariously? Can you have controls on it? Sure. Typically, when you have more controls on it, it's less usable, or you're not realizing its full capability or full utility. I do like the kind of crowdsourcing of ethics, we recognize that whoever, are not using this in the right way, I don't like the fact that if I go and do a search on some disease, all of a sudden I'm getting advertisements about something very similar that I really didn't care about in the first place. I just had a question about something, but then it becomes part of my digital footprint, if you will. And other people are using that information to try to target me, whatever. I do believe that there should be ethical behavior in AI, right? So, and when you have autonomous AI, is what specifically you said, you have to have bounded autonomy. Like, you can do this, but you can't do this, right? These are the rules of the road, so to speak. At least that's my opinion. And a license or something like that. I mean, in my opinion, you're in the right ballpark. I don't know if a license is the right thing.
And one of the key differences from an analogy standpoint, right, is it's always an arms race between the people who are trying to do something, let's say, nefarious, and the people who are trying to keep those people from doing something nefarious, right? And in the physical world, like on a real road, cops would get cars, and you could get a faster car. And then the cops' cars got faster, and then your car got faster. But eventually, there's a physical limit as to how fast you're willing to drive to get away from the cops, because you're going to lose control of your vehicle and die. Okay. There isn't that kind of limit in the interwebs, right? It's just pure computational power, which so far there's no limit to, right? Moore's law, I think we've actually done better than Moore's law in the last decade, right? So what does, there's no endpoint to that arms race, right? People are going to develop better, faster, smarter bots, and people are going to be trying to pull them over, or, you know, I'm talking about stuff I only know about this much about, but when you're in the virtual world, the limitations on arms races that apply in the physical world, those limits go away. How does that work in the end? Is it like the supply of electricity to supply that computational power that finally limits?
Well, I'm a Linux fan, and one of the most remarkable things about that operating system is not that it's better than Windows, because that wasn't really hard to accomplish. That wasn't a technical problem. Fatal system drive error, okay? You're like, no, that's not okay, but then you had to turn your machine off. There's something about that community, about that open source, and about having everything out there where things get fixed faster than they get found in many ways, right? And I don't know enough to know about whether there's some kind of best practice from that open source software community that can be placed into the community of people who develop these kinds of algorithms and bots and that kind of stuff. But there's a certain beauty in that everything is open. You can see what everyone else is doing, and it doesn't prevent bad actors. People can write, malware or whatever to hack your Linux machine, but it gets fixed pretty quickly because so many people are staring at it, right? And you're never going to, as you say, you're never going to eliminate the bad actors, but you might keep the honest people more honest because they know that people are watching. And if something gets out that's, let's say, malicious or adverse, there's a whole community of people that are watching, that see it, and either expose it, fix it, call the New York Times, I don't know, whatever, to tamp down the negative effects of that kind of malicious or malevolent behavior. You might know the answer to that better than I do.
My favorite part of the internet is not knowing who everybody is. I can't imagine how misused that would be, especially by the government. I mean, you can put a lien on somebody's, check right now. You can take money from them. If the IRS puts a lien on them, they don't get paid. If they have child support, you could get that pulled out. Could you imagine if you extended that to the internet and you have people, you can get shut down from ordering and buying things on Amazon, things that you might need. Like somebody could go to just buy something for their kids, baby formula, something, and no, there's something there preventing you from being able to do that. I can only see it just being another extension of a way to control the individual. And I think for me personally, there's a lot of bad things about having bots all over, and I know, when Ashley Madison went down, it turned out like 98% of the women were all fake. So there's a lot of, when that whole thing happened, there's a lot of bad things out there, but that's the one area where they can't get you, where you can, get around all those limitations. So I would be concerned if, you could extend jail into then really control people's lives, but every single thing they do and think, what they read. I mean, think of how Google already changes the search results to try to hide certain things from you. Can you imagine them taking it a step further if they find out you are a believer in something they don't like, and they're really going to clamp down and say you can't use Google anymore because you are, pro-life or something? I mean, it's crazy what they could do if they had that kind of control over you and there was nowhere else for you to go. So it sounds good in theory, but yeah, I can't imagine.
I would suggest...
And I am not political at all. I just threw out pro-life just as an example.
As a side gig, DuckDuckGo should hire you, Beth, because that is the perfect justification for their existence right there. And that is, I mean, I don't know whether it's cool or creepy that Google can tell me, hey, once a month, hey, do you want to know where you've been?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I do. I'm not sure I want anyone else to be able to know that either. But it sure does now.
Well, there are places in the world where that's kind of already happening, right? And
Right, it's-
places where you just really shouldn't take your cell phone. Just don't take your cell phone there, right?
And you can always create a fake account if you need to go look up something you don't want your spouse to know, or somebody like, all that goes
I wouldn't
away.
go that
All-
far, right?
I don't know.
That causes other
I-
troubles, right?
I think we're back to cars and cops.
Right, yeah, we are.
Exactly.
So that's another great question. Thank you. Let's. Oh, what? We got another one? Okay. Yeah.
Hey guys, thank you all for being here. This is such a great conversation. I could listen to this all day. I started with one question and now I have like 10, but I'll try and bring us back down to earth, at least to the height of which drones fly, and pose a question to Beth. You touched on this a little earlier. You talked about a delivery service that kind of meets you anywhere, and I imagine like somewhere in the future we have drones that fly from some sort of distribution center and meet you wherever you are based on GPS locations. And this is something I've thought about quite a lot, and I always get stuck on this idea of what if we have nefarious individuals that shoot these drones down from the sky, they wear masks to protect themselves, so image detection or whatever doesn't really work. How do we prevent that? And have you thought about the risks in developing some sort of defense system with these drones that works against humans?
I think eventually they'll have defense systems if it happens that often, but our drone is very big. It's 5 feet around. So if somebody decides to shoot that, I mean, they are really trying to kill someone. So how often do you really have that? Like, how often do you have, people are not going to take over autonomous cars and drive up on the sidewalk and through a restaurant just because they want to see if they can do it. You have to believe that those are rare occurrences. But yeah, eventually there will be probably some type of detection on there. Somebody was even saying that they're going to make car roofs stronger in case drones fall onto cars eventually down. That the cars will adjust and the cars will eventually have sensors that are like a drone is falling, get out of the way. So yeah, eventually whatever people are going to come up with, they're going to create a sensor for that.
So there's an opportunity to create an escort drone for that drone. A weaponized escort drone that will shoot back if you try to down the main drone.
Yeah. Oh, well, you'll have all these eyes in the sky. That's one thing that's great too, is you'll be able to get video feed from every drone that's everywhere, and you'll be able to see down on the ground things that were happening. It'll be incredible how much video you get.
And so if that drone has access to my GPS on my phone, then you're about as located as you can get then, right?
So if you get into a car accident, they'll be able to identify drones that were in your area, and the cops will be able to pull video feed from those drones and see exactly what happened.
It makes those Harlan Coben shows on Netflix with all the cameras in England, that'll be like child's play then.
Yeah.
Wow. No one's getting away with nothing.
Again, cops and cars, because what happens if it's not an accident? What happens if it's jaywalking? What happens if it's, it can be any number of
You're just going to
different
get mailed
things.
your ticket.
Yeah. So it can be any number of things. It's just something to think about.
Yeah. So, in spite of all the philosophy I took in college, I'm pretty pragmatic. So I want to ask a couple pragmatic questions as we've gotten onto some of these issues that are more psychological, societal, almost legal in nature. Here's just a practical question. Is all this technology making us dumber? Is all this technology making us less capable
If you're using
as a
an Apple
species?
product, yes.
Ow.
100%.
Ouch.
Well, what if you hack the kernel and you're down in there writing drivers in the Apple product?
Nobody's
not
doing
using
not Apple users. No, Android users are doing that. But yeah, most Apple users, iPhones have made it so easy. You
Like-
never even have to go in there and try to.
I don't know how to
change
drive
anything.
anywhere anymore unless someone's giving me turn-by-turn instructions. I don't know, all these different things that, like,
My answer is no, it's not making us dumber.
But there is skill degradation.
In some areas.
yeah.
But, I can't ride a horse.
Right.
But
Well-
does that mean I'm dumber? It just means I don't have a skill that's all that useful now.
Right.
I actively am trying to hire engineers, and the engineers that you could hire 20 years ago are very different than the engineers you hire today. Just finding electrical engineers that have ever worked with a breadboard, to find software developers that just don't automatically have, the whole development environment set up for them and know how to even install it. They're like, it just works. Like, it is very different, especially when you talk about, doing modifications to the kernel and kernel modules. To find somebody who knows how to do that coming out of school today, it's not a lot. It's not a lot of people.
Call me.
I know, we
Call
should
me.
talk, but I personally am just seeing that in the resumes that I'm getting back from people that, because look, it's easy in school. You go to the library, everything's installed, if you go to the library, everything's installed on the laptop for you already. You don't have to go through the grueling activity like we used to, of having to
Yeah.
set up your computer and have to figure all this stuff out. And if your computer fell in a lake, you would die because you'd have to start reinstalling everything. Nobody has that anymore.
Yeah,
So-
nobody builds them anymore,
Right.
and nobody tries to make all those parts play together anymore. Somebody
Right,
else is
and-
already taking care of all
I
that.
don't know. I think that frustration to get things to work makes you smarter a little bit. Helps you to learn how to problem solve, for sure.
Yep.
I was just going to add that skill degradation comes across as a negative, and I don't really think it's intended to necessarily be that way. It's almost like skill extinction. So, there comes a time when there's no need to ride a
Yeah,
horse.
if a skill's no
There's-
longer useful, why have it?
Yeah, there's no
Right.
need for me to be able to skin a bear and make a fur coat or whatever they did, I don't know. But I don't need to know that, because I would rather think about other things. And then you have the generation of new skills, right? And new skills, and hopefully they're more parsimonious with whatever objective it is that you're trying to reach.
Okay, so not to go too prepper or dark side on you here, but the other thing that all this tech relies on is electrical power, right? I mean, we are an electrically powered society. What happens when some of this tech goes offline or goes down? Like, do we all just hold still and hope for the best? Like, are there technologies being developed to backstop our dependence on the other technologies? How's that going to play out, do you think, over time?
It is going to play out. I mean, there are efforts underway. There's also pressure to not make those things happen. But hydrogen power, there's cold fusion, there's any number of different things to be able to develop and harness a power that's not just from electricity.
And decentralize it, right?
Yeah, like why can't I just have a pin full of power, right? And just plug it in wherever I need it, and I don't have to worry about where it came from, because it's always just there.
I spend a lot of time in Oklahoma. We're partnered with the Choctaw Nation, and there are areas there where you have no internet. I feel like panic attacks. Like it's almost like you feel like you're drowning almost. Like you have to get, like it is so addictive. You have to get it back. I mean, there are beautiful animals walking around. You don't care at all. You got to figure out how far this road goes, because again, you have no GPS. You don't even know if you're on the right road. Yeah, I don't think we're ever going back or creating any technology that's going to prevent that, other than just make sure you have internet everywhere.
It depends on for how long, right? To lose internet for an hour is one thing. To lose it for a week is a different thing, and to lose it for a year is another thing, right? So, and the longer you want to try to backstop that, I think, you definitely want to find ways where you're not going to lose internet for a year. But, sort of in your service level agreement, it's that last 9 that sometimes is the one that'll get you, but it costs $1 bazillion to make sure that last 9 is there. And, for me, I think people are hackers. They can hack their way through an hour, but we can't hack our way through a year. You're doing okay, even though you do go to Oklahoma. You're doing all right, right?
Yeah.
And by the way,
It's very scary.
for those of you that are interested, probably worth pointing out that Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma and the Springfield flight area here are two of some of the best places to fly UAS, UAVs anywhere within the perimeter of the continental United States. So go look up what the Choctaw Nation is doing in UAS and UAV flying. It's really something special.
That's where we have a flight training facility that we built there, where we train our pilots.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've only got about 7 or 8 minutes left. Does anybody have any other questions, comments, input?
Hello, hi, Aaron Jones, AFRL, Sensors Directorate, so that's a clue. So whether you're Leo, SATS...
Tim Bunning.
Tim Bunning, yeah, great.
That was a good answer, okay.
Yeah, so whatever your Leo wants to do, or your small UAS, or the information your AI needs to make decisions, the sensors provide those. And so if you could talk about, we talked a little bit about limitations and pain points for other things, and you all said materials. If we could focus on, limitations and frustrations and pain points in your sensing, I'd appreciate it.
There's no substitute for aperture, right? If you're in the photon collection business, right? So I think CubeSats are great, but at some point, I'm going to want more aperture than a CubeSat can provide. So that's one thing. I also can collect more data on a platform than often I can get down to the ground, which isn't necessarily a problem if I've got a smart enough processor, computer, set of FPGAs to say, yeah, okay, this is good, this is really what you want. I'm not going to send down the bands you don't want, but then I wonder, what did I miss, right? Persistence. So I really got 3 things like from orbit. I can get a really fine measurement spatially, I can get a fine measurement spectrally, or I can get a frequent measurement. And I usually can't get all 3, right? I can't have a KH-11 overhead all the time, everywhere I want it, that gives me infinite spatial precision and infinite spectral precision from radio to gamma ray. I just can't do it. So I have to make all these choices. And then the thing I want, instantiating that into hardware that's reliable and affordable, is the second problem. And then once I get it up there, how do I keep it safe? Because if a nefarious teenager in the Middle East or in the Far East can take a laser pointer and degrade my $1 billion sensor, what have I done? Not much.
For me, it's all about the weight. We have so many people trying to sell us these sensors, and they don't care at all that they weigh 6 pounds and my payload is 5 pounds. And I've had one guy even try to fight with me, one sales guy. He's like, just build a bigger drone. I was like, you are out of your mind. Like, so yeah, that is, people who build sensors don't even think about the final application. They figure, you'll figure it out. So weight for me, 100%.
You need a new house to go with this doorknob.
I know.
Your hangar's twice as big, and then
Yeah.
your runway's twice as big.
Really LiDAR. Yeah.
I would echo that from electric tech standpoint. LiDAR is probably the most important for us. And the other piece which I think overlaps with some of these other comments is how much juice are they pulling, and how robust are they? What can you put them through, but the data is still good? Under what conditions can you trust what they're reporting to be truth? I think there's always room for improvement in those elements.
I don't really have anything.
But the sensor is the thing, right? You can make money building a launch vehicle. You can make money building, but for my money, and this is actually something that Ohio is really good at, it's about what you do once you get there, right? You fly in space to make a measurement, to learn something, to put a sensor at a certain place at a certain time to make a certain measurement. Do you care if your sensor launches on Falcon 9 or Delta IV Heavy? As long as it gets you to the orbit, it's fine. So it's 8 minutes of value creation for the company that builds a launch vehicle, and then this nice long tail of value creation for what you've done once you get there, because the knowledge in that case is what you're after.
My addition comes less from the LiDAR and using, those particular sensor types, and more of the taking a look at cameras and how they went from big boxy cameras down to a button. They're going to get lighter, they're going to get faster, they're going to have higher resolution and so forth. But at the end of the day, you still have a lot of data, a lot of information. How do you need to fuse that information? We know the whole, the spectrum of opportunity, that the spectrum itself. Why don't we have plug and play APIs for all types of sensors, where no matter what your configuration is, it automatically configures to provide you the best information, knowing what your objectives and requirements are. And what does it need to do in the future in order to make sure that you sustain that situation awareness or decision-making authority about what it is that, again, regarding whatever your objectives are.
All right, well, I think that brings us pretty much to the end of our session. And I realize I've missed an entrepreneurial opportunity. I should have had available for purchase virtue signaling yard signs that say science fiction is real. And you could have bought them and put them in your yard as a sign that you were here at the session. But, next year.
There's always next year.
So, hey, I really appreciate the participation from the audience, some really terrific questions and some interesting discussion. Anybody else? I think I don't know how tight we are on time. I don't see any other hands up, so I think we're good. Are we good? I see Jay moving. Yeah, go ahead.
So, I got one for Andy, and we'll address that first, but then I have one mailing for the rest of you guys. Andy, I've noticed that your sock putting on degradation skills are great. Is that because you're an iPhone user? No shows is
I'm not an iPhone user. I just want to go on record. I was once.
Anyway, the rest of you, so you guys mentioned on the materials side, you brought up battery technology, and I was wondering if you guys could explain a little bit about how you see, and we talked about hype a little bit, right? Obviously, lots of hype in batteries. How has battery technology either kind of let you down on the hype curve, or what's kind of the bottleneck in your respective areas that you're looking for battery technology to help improve or enable something on your different tech areas, where it's either letting you down, or maybe you're taking advantage of it somewhere. Tell me how you're taking advantage. He's a battery scientist.
For me, I don't think the solution is batteries. I think the solution is wireless charging. And I think cars like Teslas are going to drive down the road and charge as they drive. And a lot of people are like, oh my God, you're going to talk about ripping up the roads and laying this down, and it's so expensive. And you just got to think about Thomas Edison trying to talk to people about running these wires on these poles through your neighborhood in order
every house.
to every house. And like,
Are you nuts?
it must have been, and at that time, like what that effort was like. But that's where I really see it. I just don't think they're going to find another medium that's going to be lighter than being able to do it wirelessly. I think it's just they've pushed the limits of what can be done with the physical material. I mean,
And the blockchain doesn't solve
the
this?
blockchain does it. We tried. It doesn't. Right. Crypto, no, didn't work either.
Anything else from the panel? Any last chance? Shout out any messages you want to send the audience? Otherwise, I think we're good. Thank you again, panel, for your time and for the intellect you brought to the conversation. Very enjoyable. At least I had a good time. I hope you had a good time. I hope you had a good time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.